Howdy once again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher. Welcome back to the Clausing Horizontal Mill, and this is part 5 of the series that I'm doing on, well, it's not a rebuild, but just cleaning up, reconditioning this beautiful Clausing. So in this part I will deal with lubrication of the machine, so I'm going to show you the different oiling points and talk about the different oils that you need to use on this machine. So let's get started. This is a copy of the manual, the service manual that came from Chuck, and he gave me 2 copies. He said one to use and one to lose. On page 5 is the lubrication chart, and it goes into great detail on the exact spots that you need to lubricate and what kind of oils to use. So I'm going to go through all of this one step at a time. Before I get started, remember I have a bad bearing in here. So these Fafner bearings came from on the internet, eBay is what it was. And there's the number, they're brand new, they're genuine Fafner, and they're still in the sealed packages. I had to buy 2, but it was only like $8 for a pair of them, along with free shipping. So I'll do that off camera. I'm at the back side of the machine, obviously, and I removed both guards. The power is not hooked up to the machine. Never work on a machine around belts and pulleys and all of that unless you have cut the power, and always return the guards immediately. So they obviously have to be off for this particular operation. I think you all know that the speeds can be changed on clausing, lathes, and milling machines by the variable pitch pulleys, and this is the controller for that, and it's just a matter of a hydraulic line with some fluid, and well, I'll get around to that in a second. But right down here it tells you what kind of oil to use, and it differs from what it says in the manual. So let me zoom in on that. It says keep the oil cup full at all times, use clean, dirt-free number 10 hydraulic oil. Fill at low speed, that's 360 RPM. If dial reading is incorrect, turn the variable speed control to 360, hold it there for 30 seconds, and so on. But all we need to do there is to fill up the reservoir, and it is full. And there are several other oils that'll work. An ISO 36 hydraulic oil is fine as well. And what it says in the manual is an oil that really isn't available anymore. It says Shell Tellus number 27. That's an obsolete number. So that is the reservoir, and it's full. It's okay, so we do not need to mess with it. But notice that the hydraulic line then goes down to a fitting there on the variable pitch pulley, and that just causes it to expand, I should say open or close. This machine has a gearbox, that is, I should say, that has back gears in here. You probably saw the controller on the other side. I'm going to cover all the controls in the next video, but the oil is in the bottom here of this casting, and there's the drain hole and there's the fill hole, or I should say it's the hole to check how full it is. We fill it on the other side, which I'll get to in just a second, but let me take that out right now. Well, I've already done so, but I'm going to do it again. And it is low on oil, and the oil is filthy black, so I'm going to drain it. But let me open that up and show it to you. All right. Now, if it's sufficiently full, when you back that screw out, there should be some oil dripping out of there, but there is none. So I'll use this wire tie as a dipstick here. And you can see there is oil in there, just not enough, but what I'm concerned with is it's so black. So I'm going to drain it and out of the bottom hole, and then we'll talk about filling it. And it requires number, let me look it up here, like a gear oil, number 140 hypoid extreme oil, which is like differential oil. This could be extremely messy, so I'm ready to pull the plug, and I've got a funnel with a long hose going down into a Maxwell House coffee can. And I really have no idea how much oil is in there. Perhaps it's only a pint, but maybe it's 2 quarts, so we'll see. It does not say in the manual. And I want this to drain for a long time. That's why I'm doing it so early in the video. And in just a little while here, I'm going in the house for a while to have lunch and so on while that drains. I'm not going to rinse it, but probably should put some kerosene or something in there. The ambulance just went by, in case you didn't hear that. And that oil is just as black as can be, isn't it? This is what it says in the manual. SAE number 140 Hypoid Extreme Pressure Oil. But this manual was printed in 1975. This is what I'm going to use. Gear lubricant from 85 up to 140. Back on the side of the machine, this is what it says regarding filling the oil. It said to take this cover off. Not that it couldn't be done in that top plug, but you'd have to use a real a small funnel and tube and everything, so it would be most awkward. But I've already had this off once, and you can see one of the gears, this little cast iron plate, but of course the first time the gasket just fell apart. It's a cork gasket, so the first thing I need to do is to make another gasket, and I can see a little bit of the gear in there, but not a whole lot. Now let's make a cork gasket. It's about 2 hours later. It's raining, not that that has anything to do with it, but I did run a quart of non-detergent motor oil down the hole on the other side to flush it just a little bit. So now I will replug the bottom hole, and then remember, as I add the gear oil to the other side, I will put in enough, and about a quart came out. I'm just guessing, so I'm going to put a quart in, or until it starts to run out of this hole. Kind of like we did on some tractors. Some of the old 2-cylinder John Deeres were that way. They had a... I think this is going to be a mess. I've got some of this gear oil in a more convenient container than that big 2-gallon thing that I showed you. Back on this side, I added less than a quart, and it is oozing out of that hole, so I'm going to plug her up and clean up and call it quits on the gearbox. And on this side, I will close the gear slot here with the cover and the new gasket. The third kind of oil that it calls for is simply number 20 weight non-detergent type of lubricating oil. This came from Napa, and I use this on a lot of other machinery as well, but that's what I have in this pump oiler and even this oil can. But really you need a pump oiler to squirt into the Gitz oilers, and it needs to have a tip that looks like this. That's what gets into those ball type of Gitz oilers. So this is essential. There are probably some other similar type of tips. That one probably will work, but everyone loves the ubiquitous Eagle number 66 oil can, and I think we can blame Adam Booth for the shortage of these, creating the demand. Howdy, Adam. So that's equipped with number 20 weight. Well, I guess before I get into the actual oiling, I wanted to show you this. Now, this by H&W, and you can get that out of Indiana. This is what, this is whey oil, and that's what the Bridgeport manual calls for. Now, Bridgeport wheys aren't really any different than this machine, so this could certainly be used in the pump oiler, and it's a little stickier oil. It sticks to the wheys. That's the beauty of this. And you can just put it in this type of oil can and rub it on the wheys. But let's get started over the other side with the main spindle bearings. This is really the only oiler for the spindle bearings, and it calls for just filling it up to the runover hole, I believe is what it said. So this is already really full, but I'm giving it a couple more shots. And that's done. You see here on number D3, that's referring to the bearing that I just lubricated, and it says use SAE number 20, filled to the overflow hole, and that's to be done daily. If it's got a D on it, that means daily. If it has a W, it's weekly, M for monthly, F for frequently, whatever that happens to mean, and then T for twice a year. I think I'll talk about the wheys, first of all, on the x-axis, longitudinal. And if you look in that T-slot there, you will see an oiler. Can you see that? And there's one on the other side as well, and I showed some of this in the other video, and it's well oiled because I had this all apart, but the idea with this oil can is to put it right into the ball, and remember there are oil galleries, so I just oiled the wheys. You can also get up underneath, let's see, right here, and oil them, and then probably rub it in because it's going to make a mess. And same thing on the other side, and then around on the back side of the table. Now, in order to get at this oiler, you have to crank the table way down toward the end, and that's about as far as I can go right now, and that gives you access with your oil can into that oiler. And then always wipe it. And this would give me a chance to get underneath here and oil these wheys. My fingers are on the dovetail right now. I'm on my knees now, underneath the machine, so this is the bottom of the table. Also, you can see the wheys, the V-wheys here, or dovetail wheys rather, that can be oiled. But now I'm concerned with the saddle, and there is the Gitz oiler. Can you see it? Of course you can. Now there is none on the other side. This is the only one. Oh, and that's messy. And I got to use one of Mrs. Peterson's pillowcases to wipe that. This, of course, is the knee, and there is the oiler, and there is none on the other side. And wipe. All right, I missed one oiler. Now, I told you earlier that there was no oiler on this side of the knee, but looking at it closer, there is one when someone has painted over it. And this machine has been painted at least once. So I will scrape the paint off of that ball and I will oil it. I'll do that off camera. It's kind of awkward to get in here. I'll have to get in from the bottom below the drive shaft right here, but that's one that I missed. It's very important to keep your machine clean and get the chips out of the dovetails, but looking right here where it's very well exposed, just take some of this oil, put it on there and rub it with your fingers. Also on the other side, which might be out of a camera vision there, and down at the bottom. On both sides, and keep those surfaces clean. I can't emphasize that enough. Similarly, back the saddle out like that, and that's the y-axis, and you can get some oil right in here and over here and rub it around. Same thing here. Move that in, and then that gives you room to get in here into oil. And it doesn't need oiling now because it's all been reassembled, but that's what needs to be done. And I did oil the screws earlier, remember when I had it apart. But let's take a look at that. From this angle you can see the main screw here for the table, so you can get up underneath and squirt some oil on that. Make sure you keep it clean. Same thing on the other end. That's your best way to oil that. And then while I'm under here, I reiterate here about the dovetail here, oil that, and on the other side and the other end of the table. This large screw here that looks like it's about 1.25 inches, be sure to wipe that clean. And again, don't use compressed air. That's what drives the chips up here. You know, gravity will never allow chips to get up here, but an air hose sure will. I know I have harangued on that, but the directions say to get some oil on this. And to keep it clean. You don't want chips right in here where the brass nut is, you know, to start grinding away and abrading the precision parts. And of course, these two overarm shafts need to be kept clean and oiled, and even if you're not using them real often, you ought to slide them in and out. And you can see the trouble that Steve Summers had with his, they were just frozen in there. And this small machine just makes his problems look so much bigger than mine, because, well, there really was no problem here, but oil them like that. And if you keep them clean, and see how nicely those slide now? I had these out too, as you saw in the other video. And oil the other ends as well, way on the back side, where you can see this moving. The bearings in here, and there's also one in here, of course, look like that. That Fafner bearing I showed you a little bit earlier. And this one was a bad bearing. But the machine is, what, 45 years old, so, you know, lubrication only lasts so long. But we do not need to, we cannot lubricate those. And same thing, there's one down here on the other end. And it says that weekly you ought to have a drop of oil on this shaft and right here, because this slides in and out. But nothing to service in here. However, there are two gears in here, and it mentions nothing about those, but I did lubricate those with some lithium grease when I had this thing off, and you may have watched that video. So there are a couple gears in there that are revolving at a fairly high speed, but only with the hand crank. There is no power at that speed. Well, I take it back. There is a power feed on here, but it's probably not going to crank it that fast. So we need to talk about lubricating this now. You know, the last few days I've got a sore back, so it's really bothering me to bend down to work on this machine. It would be very convenient if I could get it up on the bench or elevate it so I didn't have to stoop down. But that sounds rather preposterous. Well, it wasn't preposterous for one Mr. Dave Kelly, who put his Cincinnati #2 milling machine up on a workbench so he did not have to bend down. How awesome is that? And that machine must have weighed 10 times what this little closing weighs. Well, now I'm going to service this gearbox here for the power feed, and the first thing I will do before I take it apart, I think, is to squirt a little oil in that ball oiler, and now I got to take the cover off. Alright, there are 4 screws holding this cover on, and it was kind of stubborn getting it off, but there it comes. And look at the debris in there. It's hardened grease is what it is, I believe. And there's just as much. Oh, this is a disgrace. This is an absolute disgrace, what I'm seeing here. All right, I think I'm going to probably have to take the whole box off and thoroughly clean it. Maybe I can do it from here. And the whole idea is I want to get some grease on these gears, but it is a mess. It almost looks like a bird's nest or a mouse nest in there. All right, see you in a few minutes. This is how much dried grease and debris that was in that gearbox. And here's the cover. I've got that all cleaned up. That's looking real good. And I've done a pretty admirable job, I think, of cleaning the gearbox itself. This is a very complicated little gearbox. This, of course, is the drive shaft coming from the other gearbox, which we'll talk about in a little while. But we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 gears, plus there's a worm back in here that you can't even see. And I'm going to take the squirt oiler and get some oil in on all of the bearings. I assume they're probably oilite type bearings. They seem to be okay. And then on this sliding shaft here. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. They spin freely. I'm probably showing more of this than what I should, because how many people actually have a closing mill. But I'm taking some of this lithium grease here, and I'm just going to more or less pack each one of the gears. And I'm wanting to get some way back in there on that worm. And I'll rotate the gears to spread that. Now the question is, can I get this thing back together? Well, that took me about an hour, and it was no easy job putting this thing back together, believe me. Cleaning and assembling it would have been easier if it was on the bench, but in this position it was most awkward. But the question is, will it work? Yes. A prayer of thanks. Now I'm at the back of the machine again, and we're going to service this gearbox. The power feeds on this machine are really great, but it requires 2 different gearboxes, so it must have been terribly expensive to produce. And you can see why they are using the electric ones on machines, where it would eliminate all of this business coming off of the motor. And that's not a new feature. I mean, they've had that for many years. So Here is the aluminum cover with 3 cap screws, and I can see I have 1, 2, 3 oilers. I really don't want any oil on that belt. That's why I have it covered with a surgical towel. Love that oil can. And then some of the grease on the gears, and of course that'll spread. Don't need a whole lot. And that's all there is to that, and I'll go ahead and put the cover back on. I'll wipe it first. I don't want any extra oil in there that might get on that belt. There you can see that oil getting, or that grease getting worked in. There's one other oiler right in here that almost got missed. Well, I'm still at the back with the cover off. All of the bearings that are on the variable speed drive, both on the top and the bottom, are factory sealed bearings. Hopefully these are in good condition, but they are not serviceable, as are not the bearings on the motor serviceable. They would be also sealed, and you can't quite see that anyway, but behind that big shiv there is the motor, and we don't have to worry about that till it starts howling. Twice a year this cover needs to be taken off, and let's see what it looks like inside of there. That's cast iron. Oh wow. And I will wipe out the dirty grease here and put some new grease in, and a couple places to oil, but mainly grease, a little bit of oil on those shafts. A lot of gears, a lot of clusters in there. So I'll wipe that all up. I worked almost an hour on that, but taking the squirt oil can, I want to make sure I get oil on the end of every bearing, or the end of every shaft, which is a bearing. And any extra oil will drip down here, and that's probably why there was such a mess before. And then there needs to be oil on every shaft, or at least this shaft, that goes back and forth so that can slide freely. Next, I'm going to take the grease and put a little grease on every one of the gears, and it'll spread. They were wet. They were not dry like those other gears in the previous box. So now, whether or not either one of these gearboxes has ever been opened or serviced, I do not know. What I'll do is run the motor now off camera and let that spread, and then just give it just another dab of grease. So I'm sure I got grease on all sides of the periphery of the gears. The brass yoke on the cover plate goes right in here like a fork. Maybe we should call it a fork, or I should call it a fork. That will slide this into, well, 3 positions, but there's also neutral between all the gears. So that would be a neutral, and then we're on a gear there, we're in neutral again, and then in the gear here. So I'm going to move it all the way down to the left, and there's the fork. Now make sure you don't let this, this is a rack and a pinion here, even though the rack is circular rather than square. Do not let the yoke come all the way out of there, or you will lose your timing, and it'll be most difficult to coordinate it again with the ABC on there. And ask me how I know. So there the yoke is in position, and I'll get couple of these started and button it up. And hopefully I'm done, at least with this box. I'll wipe it off because I've got oil and grease everywhere. All right, all 6 bolts are tightened. I'm going to turn it on now and just proof it to make sure that this works properly. I'm in A position. And you can see the drive shaft turning, or can you? I'll move it in between A and C, and you can see it stopped. Now into C, and it might clash. Yeah. And then between C and B is a neutral, and then into B if it'll go without clashing. These are spur gears, so you really need to stop the machine in order to shift it. So now in B, so everything is correct. And I'll talk about the operation of this in the next part of the video series. When using the overhead support with an arbor, and this isn't the right arbor in here right now, there is an oiler right here which oils this brass or bronze bearing here that is the arbor support. Now let me point out that really wherever any 2 parts are turning together, there needs to be a drop or 2 of oil. I may have missed a few. Some of this is common sense. Remember, you want to use some of that oil on the table and just all of the unpainted surfaces during the cold weather. This is a cold weather garage because there'll be condensation in the spring that'll prevent rust. And you know, every screw needs to be oiled. Remember that there's no good way to oil this screw. But let me see if I can push that cover back and we have access to that. No, there is no access to this screw through this plate here unless we do some removal of some of the parts, which of course you're not going to do. But what you can do is to get down here on your knees, and underneath here where my hand is, or where the screwdriver is, I am touching that screw with the screwdriver. So you could get underneath there and squirt it and with a pump type oiler, and you will get oil on that screw. Now, I do understand there's probably only a handful of people in the entire world that own one of these machines, this particular model of clausing, so you're wondering, why am I telling you how to lubricate one of these? Well, much of what I told you applies to any big knee-type horizontal milling machine, or vertical mill for that matter, in regards to proper lubrication. Now, you can see where there was some neglect. There always is in a factory where there might not be any particular person responsible for the maintenance or the oiling, but some of that needs to be done every day. Wherever we use the pump oiler, pretty much every day. The gearbox is only twice a year and so on, but you need to monitor that so that you have long life with your machines and minimum wear, and that will give you accuracy and pleasure as you do your machining. This video took much longer to do. I thought it would be a real short one because all I'm doing is showing you how to squirt a little oil, but I probably spent 3 or 4 hours making the video, and part of that was because I had to take things apart. This is tubalcain saying so long for now, and join me in the next part of this video series on the clausing horizontal mill. Thank you for watching.